Well, it all began when I first moved into Coquina. That Marion Kerr was and that was Bonnie's mother, was the welcome person. And so she met me with cookies one day, the first day I lived here. And the next day I went to the church service and she introduced me to Bonnie. And that was the first time I had ever met her.
I thought he was a very nice man, and my mother told me that he had lost his wife just before he came to Shell Point, and my first husband had died just 2 months after we moved in. And so we kind of had a little common ground there. And so I thought he was very kind and very nice, and he'd be a good friend, but that was all it was going to be, as long as that was comfortable for both of us. And so that's how it was. I didn't think anything more of it.
So we did end up in a small group, and we would meet every couple weeks. And we did ministry together in the church. I joined with her. She was a chaplain at the Arbor, and so I decided that I would help out in the Vesper services from week to week. And so we did some of those things together.
I would never talk to him in public on the grounds. Church, nothing else. It was like...
Yeah, we never sat together in church.
Never sat together, never talked to him. Only when we were doing something with our mothers that was legitimate, not as a couple.
But once in a while we'd be out in town somewhere, maybe going to the bookstore, and we found out after we were engaged that people already had seen some of those things but didn't say anything. Well, we got engaged on Valentine's Day in 2009. So it was about 2 years later.
It was
3 years.
About 3 years later that we got engaged, and that was the first time I said, okay, Jerry, this is going to be our first date. I'm willing to make it a real date. This is going to be fun. So we did. We went out to Mimi's, had a nice dinner, came home, and we're sitting on my sofa, and Jerry pulled out his Bible. And he said, you know, God has been showing me all along some verses that I think he was showing me about us and about waiting and being patient. And I said, okay, I can't argue with that.
And then you had found some scripture too that verified that it was time for us. So we did.
Yeah, it was, my problem was more fear. Second marriage, complications, families, all of this kind of thing. And it was like God said to me, okay, are you going to trust me and go, or are you going to hold back by fear? And it just happened that those two things came together on Valentine's Day.
Same day.
The day of our first date.
Well, we got married July the 11th after quite a time to figure out when we were going to do it.
When we could get both of our families together with all their different lives.
We had my family in New England, and Bonnie's was up in the Midwest, and then she had a part of the family in Germany. Mm-hmm. So you tried from April until September to try to find a date when we get married. So it was July the 11th. And they all came down.
Mm-hmm. And it was hot.
We got married right here in the church. It was quite an event that summer. Everybody was invited.
As we were planning it, our thought was, where should we have it? How many people? How do we do it? And then we looked at each other and said, who are we going to leave out? And so essentially we said, anybody who wants to come is welcome. And there was a little notice in the bulletin, the church bulletin, everybody's welcome, and the church was pretty full. It was a wonderful occasion. For our wedding, his oldest son stood up for him, and my oldest daughter stood up for me.
It was wonderful, and they had never met before.
And they've never been together again, just because his kids live on the East Coast, my kids live in the Midwest. With all the different schedules, they just can't get together.
One of the interesting things, they got together and took, instead of giving us wedding gifts, which we don't need at this point in our life, they all went together and gave us the money to go to Cinque Terre in Italy for a honeymoon. And that was really a highlight of our life, to see that. It was beautiful there. We spent several days there.
It was. I feel like having been married, we've kind of worked through some of the early young person's kind of issues. And so going into this marriage, it really was very much of a spiritual decision as well as emotional. And so to live it that way without the kinds of sometimes unrealistic expectations that young people have about everything being wonderful and rosy and romantic all the time. So instead of that, we're surprised by how good it is.
It was very interesting when we announced our engagement. Our small group just all sort of laughed. They said, well, we had that all figured out a long time ago. And we're still meeting together with the same group and enjoying it. So that there is a real blessing to the people here at Shell Point that we enjoy just being a part of the community.
I loved it when we finally said, okay, we're engaged. It was just such a sense of freedom. And then to find all these people that had been cheering for us behind the scenes was wonderful. And we were able to come back from our honeymoon to a community that we already knew and loved, and who wrapped us in their arms too. It was wonderful.
And we still feel that.